This is the Perlo Podcast. We talk construction, its people, its challenges, its opportunities. We talk to industry and trade experts, movers and shakers, and people who get buildings built right. Join us. You won't regret it. Welcome. My name is Elissa, and I'm pleased to be hosting the brand new Perlo Podcast. As Perlo's Director of Strategic Initiatives, it's my pleasure to be bringing you insights into the commercial construction industry through great discussions with a variety of leaders. I'm joined today by three greats from Perlo. We have Dennis Bonin, our Safety Manager, Chris McLaughlin, the Vice President of Preconstruction, and Todd Duwe, Vice President of Business Development. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Elissa.
So we just closed out 2021. We're here in January of 2022, and I think 2 years ago, none of us would have guessed where we would be today, having gone through the COVID-19 pandemic. And since then, the construction industry has shifted in a variety of ways. I would even venture to say that the pace that we've changed, how we operate, how we communicate, our openness to new technologies has accelerated as a result of the pandemic. And aside from the pandemic, we've also encountered a significant labor shortage, inflationary pressures, and supply chain constraints. So it's safe to say the construction industry today is not the same as it was 2 years ago, and how companies have reacted to this change is nothing short of revolutionary. So we're going to spend some time talking about that revolution, what it all means. Dennis, you have an interesting perspective as our leading safety professional, and COVID has affected safety in terms of human health in ways that prior efforts really haven't. Can you talk a little bit about what has changed with construction safety due to the health concerns we've experienced?
Sure. I think probably one of the most significant impacts has been navigating the different regulations, federal regulations, state regulations, local regulations, and then we have independent client regulations. And knowing on any one job site what we need to enforce and the guidelines that we have to follow. With that, they're all changing rapidly. So you can't develop a routine because they change so regularly that you even makes it even more confusing. So that's probably one of the most significant. In addition, we're managing a transient workforce. And so our employees aren't necessarily working in any one state. They might be crossing borders, and they might be crossing from project to project. So again, it's that level of consistency that's been extremely difficult to maintain. Another impact has been managing a workforce with the personal protective equipment requirements and the social distancing requirements. You have crew members that are used to working next to each other, doing tasks that they've been trained to help one another, working in a scissor lift, for example. And now all of a sudden, we're in a position where we can't have two people working in close proximity to one another. That's been a real challenge in how to relearn how to do some of our tasks or prioritize the tasks so that way they can be accomplished under the current guidelines. One of the harder things, and I think this is something that we really didn't see coming, was managing the internal relationships and the perspectives, the deep personal beliefs of employees, and how that has really impacted crew cohesiveness. Sure, politics, that banter goes on in projects a lot. Well, you bring something as important as COVID and whether or not employees are vaccinated, that's a really deep personal choice. And when you interject that onto a job site, there tends to be strong feelings, and there certainly has been an opportunity for hardship with that.
Yeah, and the COVID vaccine has been something that's highly divisive and inconsistent in terms of enforcement. Who needs it, who doesn't, what job sites want it, that kind of thing.
Right, yeah. And we know that, again, this is largely client-driven. Those clients in the medical industry or some of our larger clients who are managing these directives directly down to us. So, yeah. Another issue has been managing those employees that are in quarantine as it relates to their pay and benefits. That has even changed at the beginning of this year. What was required from the feds to what can be a company perspective on when you provide that reimbursement to those employees. So that's something that we kind of still struggle with, kind of on a case-by-case basis. And then I think lastly, it's the compliance drift. So this is our second year, and we started off really strong with abiding by these rules and regulations, and we really haven't, in my opinion, been impacted as much with COVID on our job sites. And so employees tend to let their guard down a little bit. And now with some of these new variants, we're being caught off guard because we've had some impacts where employees have gotten used to maybe not wearing their masks at all times or not observing the social distancing at all times.
I think one positive thing on the health front, though, is paying a little more attention to sanitation, washing hands, using hand sanitizer. Some of those health standards, I think, have gone up. And do you think those have been maintained over time on job sites now in this last couple of years?
I think there's a little bit of drift, but yes, definitely, those basic things have been greatly improved. And I think that we'll probably see those continue even without COVID being a factor. Yeah. I think
so
Tool
too.
washing, not sharing PPE, those are all things that we've learned.
Good. That's a positive benefit, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Todd, let's move to what you tend to keep your eye on, and that's all the market sectors that are out there. There's retail, industrial, office, healthcare. Can you talk about how the last couple of years have impacted those markets?
Absolutely. 2 years ago, to your point, it felt like the world was going to drop out. And nobody knew what to expect. There was a mad scramble for toilet paper and other products like that. And for a while there, we weren't sure what was going to happen. But quickly, the market reacted, and we saw some market sectors accelerate while others did turn down quite a bit. So, for instance, healthcare. There was so much uncertainty in healthcare. A lot of larger healthcare projects in our region were put on hold for a time being, and they were focused more on triage and maybe setting up temporary tents to triage patients coming into the hospital. On the other hand, e-commerce quickly exploded. It really took off, and some of those e-commerce giants really took advantage of this, and it has caused an explosion in the industrial market sector. So we've been, so those companies that are in multiple market sectors, those general contractors and design teams that are working across multiple market sectors, have had to transition their resources into those different market sectors. Hotels were a market sector that took a big hit originally too, and a lot of travel was shut down. However, there's an insatiable appetite for travel, and we're starting to see recovery in that market sector. Office has been a little slower to rebound. It's the vacancy rates higher than ever before. And that's going to take a little while for that I think it's still on the incline, vacancy rates. And it'll take a while for those vacancy rates to be absorbed and then create enough demand for new office buildings. But recent things we've been hearing, there's still office building projects out there. It's just location and specific client needs that are driving that market sector. Again, we're seeing, especially in the Northwest, more than ever before in the industrial market sector, we're seeing a lot of interest. There's still a lot of money out there, a lot of institutional money, and we're seeing interest from national developers out there. So there is still high demand. You mentioned supply chain issues, and it's global supply chain issues. One of the things we see, a lot of goods, including construction materials, are manufactured abroad. And there is a push to try and manufacture more stateside. But in order to do that, we need more buildings to manufacture those materials in, and those require more building materials. So we're almost seeing this, I hate to use this terminology again, but it's the toilet paper effect within the construction industry. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's a week by week challenge for those. But we do see that driving more manufacturing stateside. So there's a good outlook for industrial projects for several years to come. Yeah.
Which is excellent news for us.
Absolutely is. Yes.
Excellent. Chris, you keep an eye on construction pricing as our Vice President of Pre-Construction, and you're certainly well known for your attention to costs in our region. And I think most are aware that we've seen construction costs skyrocket, you might say, in this last year. Is that true across the board for all materials?
Costs in general have gone up over the past year. Not all materials the same. Early in 2021, I was in conversation with a broker, and I said, wow, the costs are really volatile. And he said, well, I think you might be incorrect there, because volatile means they're coming down and up and down and up, but I only see them going up. So I stood corrected and said, yes, they are going up. It's just a matter of how fast they're going up. We've seen items like the components of a roof structure triple in 2021. So triple in cost. If you can imagine the price of a gallon of gas tripling or a gallon of milk tripling, everybody would notice and be up in arms. It has a big impact on the overall construction costs. Whereas things like asphalt paving have stayed generally the same for the last year and a half. So some things are relatively flat, some things have skyrocketed. Overall, the components generally push the prices up, and it's been a significant increase. And at the latter part of 2021, we heard that, we hear a lot of inflationary news, that inflation and wages and costs of everything are going up. That will eventually trickle into the construction industry. So the labor prices have continued to rise. We haven't seen skyrocketing labor costs, but they've gradually crept up, and they've definitely not been flat.
If prices are going up, especially something like on industrial buildings, we're seeing a big demand for industrial buildings, and the roof structure is a pretty big component of that. How are the costs influencing building owners, developers, in terms of which projects they're going to move forward with and which they aren't?
Well, for every one we send out the door, we're just on pins and needles. Like, we've got to be at the edge. It's got to drive them over the edge, and we haven't gotten there yet. So that the answer is that the rents appear to be keeping up with the costs, which hasn't slowed the market down at all at this point. There will obviously be, at some point in the future, a tipping point where those cross over, but the rents have so far kept up with that, and it doesn't seem to have any impact on it at all. Everybody's says, wow, that's a big change, or wow, that's really expensive, but okay, let's go. So it's been a little stressful, and but things keep moving forward.
Chris, normally under normal circumstances, we're updating our pricing index once a year. How often do you need to update pricing, and how often is it changing? It's
down to the day. I mean, it's literally down to the day. Within the last hour, I pulled up a quote from a subcontractor from 6 days ago, and I called him up and said, "You really can't be telling me it's gone up this much in 6 days." And he said, "Well, because of the products that go into it and the supply and projection into the future, it really has modified that much in 6 days."
Wow.
I do participate in the government's producer price index on a monthly time frame, and they update a lot of the stuff behind the scenes, and they're getting data from a lot of people across the United States. So I see minor upticks in construction costs as they come through in the data that I need to verify or update, but it seems to be just a gradual uptick. Every time we turn around, it's slightly up.
So let's shift gears a little bit here. A big topic today is our workforce. For years, we've heard that there's a looming shortage as baby boomers retire, fewer individuals are entering the trades. But today, we're not just looking at that labor shortage coming, we are in it. We're here. Todd, you and I have collaborated quite a bit on some initiatives to look at diversifying the industry. There's a great sense of camaraderie within our region in particular to look at diversity, how we can get more people into this workforce. There's a sense of urgency about it more than there's ever been. Can you talk more about the efforts that are underway and what you see for the future?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, we've been talking about this for years. the Associated General Contractors chapter here locally has been talking about for decades, nearly 2 decades now. We knew this was coming, and there has been some efforts initiated several years ago, and we're starting to see some of those take place. And really where I think it needs to go into is the schools. That's where there needs to be more exposure to our industry and knowledge of the different professions that are available as a career profession in our industry. Many times construction was looked upon as a last choice career, and there's an education process, not only the students and the next generation coming up, but their parents, school counselors, that construction should be considered a first choice career. Looking back, there's we went away for many years, we went away from the wood shop and the CTE type programs that we're seeing emerge today. So that's a good sign, is that there's acknowledgement, and then it hasn't quite reached all schools across the board. I'm on the advisory board for the Beaverton School District for their construction CTE program. And that has representation from industry partners as well as union representation as well, to make sure that that pre-apprentice program is getting the proper curriculum and education. So that is one way.
Let's clarify. CTE is Career Technical Education.
Yes.
Right? So the various schools are starting to put in programs for, say, a wood shop or welding or even cooking. We've seen cooking, a variety of trade classes geared more towards getting people exposed to different trades.
Absolutely. And to your point, there's representation from multiple trade unions at the table. So students are getting exposure to multiple trades, to your point. I think as well, there is more recruitment for women and BIPOC population to improving the recruitment into our industry. So in order to make up the lost labor force that we've been talking about, the aging labor force, it needs to be across all races, and so that's a really important thing to make up for the labor force.
Yeah, there's been some really great efforts in terms of youth and programs geared towards women. So Oregon Trades Women is one, Girls Build is another great effort. Women in construction, there's really been a good push to teach young girls that they can build the skills that are necessary to be successful in construction.
Right, and to that point, they need to see role models. And so it takes volunteers to go out there into the schools and to be a part of these organizations and develop relationships and talk to those students about the career opportunities that they have in front of them. So appreciate all that you've done there yourself, Elissa.
Oh, thank you. Chris, you did mention that labor prices have gone up a little bit. They're kind of creeping up, but can you talk more specifically about what the labor shortage is doing for construction costs, and how do you think the industry is reacting to that?
Well, the wages have gone up slowly over time. They've been, maybe in the last few years, people have done other items such as hiring bonuses and such to get people into the industry, but the overall hourly wages have gradually kept up, but not any faster than regular inflation. They've kind of matched inflation over time. But what we're seeing is if there's a labor shortage, then a person, instead of working a 40-hour week, will have to work a 58-hour week in one case, and the average cost of an hour of labor for 58 hours is not the same as an average cost for 40 hours, plus maybe some loss in productivity for working those long hours. So it will have an impact, and it does have an impact on the overall cost of construction based on that overtime that happens on the course of keeping up with the project, and lack of other people to take over when you go home. You have to work the extra hours to get the job done.
And secondarily, we're seeing just an unavailability for overtime sometimes. I think heard recently that trucking is having a really hard time finding people. So if they need to work off hours, they just can't find the labor. It's not there.
Right. There's just some trades that there's just nobody left.
Dennis, you're out in the field interacting with workers more so than really the rest of us. What's your perspective on our workforce right now?
Yeah, well, I think specific to COVID, there were two really labor groups that were impacted. The first is our elderly workers, I guess. They made the personal choice with COVID to either retire early or not come back to the job site because of their exposure. Perhaps they have comorbid factors or pre-existing medical conditions. They'd be more susceptible to COVID and the impacts of COVID. And so, we've lost a few of our veteran employees who are choosing not to come back. And the second group that was really impacted were some of our younger workers that are parents, whether they were impacted by their daycare was now closed and they needed to provide full-time childcare for their children, or they were in a position where only one of them needed to work, and so there were some impacts there. And some of those employees, they're not coming back into the construction trades. They've experienced the home life, maybe have found something that they can do from home, and there isn't really the draw to come back into the construction industry. So,
yeah, that's been a challenge. Shifting our conversation again here, we're having to pay attention to so many variables right now because there's health and wellness, there's finding efficiencies to counteract the shortage of labor, and ways to be more conscious of our environment. I think you'll all agree that working in the construction industry historically has been about who can work the hardest, the longest, and just dedicate their entire lives to their work. And as far as the environment is concerned, the industry hasn't always been the best about making reduction of our footprint a priority. But we're seeing that attitude shift, and it's been accelerated, I think, with the COVID-19 pandemic and the combined with the emergence of a younger generation who is paying attention to these things. They want a little more of a work-life balance. So let's talk about sustainability, both in terms of the environment and our workforce. Where are we going to be in 5 years' time, do you think? Todd, you want to get us started?
Yes. Well, on the heels of this pandemic, we're actually still in it, but on the heels of the social injustice movement, sustainability is a theme that is being talked about more and more, and it's kind of a gradual thing. It didn't come on as sudden as the pandemic, but it is getting a lot more attention, and consumers are a lot more focused on where their products are coming from than ever before. And you're going to see, and same thing with the buildings. If a company is looking to locate their headquarters into a building, they are actually looking for more sustainable options out there. And that's a pledge they've often given their shareholders and their customers. So mass timber is an example of where the industry is implementing a new technology, and it's a building product that can sequester carbon and is a renewable resource. So we're starting to see more and more implementation of mass timber out there across the board. A lot of our industry gets driven by client demand, so our industry oftentimes adjusts to that. And there is the bleeding edge of technology and innovation, and we try to be right there behind that in the leading edge of innovation and technology. So I think construction companies and architects and engineering firms are very adaptable. I think we've seen changes over the years through different economic cycles, and I think there's an excitement to learn something new. So I don't see it. I think there's opportunity out there, and I'm excited about that moving in the future. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about technology that's helping some of these efficiencies? I mean, mass timber is a great product, but we've seen 3D printers, even some maybe printing concrete. Can you talk a little more about some of the technological advancements?
There is some really exciting technology out there, and it is fun to see it all coming out, because I think there's a great opportunity in the construction industry. You talked about 3D printing, and it has the opportunity to maybe reduce the need for on-site labor force, but I think it's more of, we're not necessarily going to lose jobs, it's going to create new types of jobs. There's going to be people needing to build 3D printers and learning how to operate those. So maybe I can see construction jobs becoming more technologically based versus and less manual labor. And that has its benefits too across the board. With mass timber, it's more of a modular product as well. So again, that can be something that gets erected onto the job site versus having to cut and modify it on site. So
we're going to put all those Lego building skills to use
exactly
with our mass timber projects.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that technology we've seen on the safety side too. Dennis, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So it's exciting to see some of these new tools that are coming out and available to our workers, things like clutch drill motors that would prevent wrist injuries if they were to bind, battery operated tools. Now you're taking the management of extension cords out of the game to where you're reducing that trip hazard or the electrical hazard associated with it. Some of that technology, though, is a double-edged sword. So let's use pneumatic nailers, for example. You get a crew who is using this technology, they might be able to build faster with the pneumatic nail gun, but they're losing proficiency in using a hand tool, a simple hammer. So it's kind of a, like I said, double-edged sword there. Certainly, as we look at the benefits of prefabrication, it might be attractive to some workers where instead of being out in the elements, now you're in a conditioned space, you're working on an ergonomically correct workstation, and you're able to mass produce some of the things that we use on a daily basis. And using the CNC technology where you're getting people involved in construction, but using a very different skill set that might be more attractive to some of our younger workers.
Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see a lot of efforts towards prefabrication very soon. That's probably one of the quickest things coming.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. You're starting to see more and more of it on job sites. When we are interviewing for projects, clients are more and more interested about it. So they're getting educated about it as well. So with that usually drives our industry. When clients are asking for something, it pushes that envelope of innovation. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Right. And along with innovation, you have products like the building image modeling, BIM, where you're able to use that technology to identify safe hazards.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, we've literally used that to plan out where a safety anchor should go for both temporary and permanent installations.
Exactly.
Make sure they don't conflict.
And I've been around this industry long enough to, when I first graduated from school, I worked for an architecture firm, and I was literally changing the ammonia out of the blueprint machine. And nowadays, we've gone digital. It's paperless. Yeah. So we've come a long way in the last 30 years.
Well, shoot,
to say the least. Yeah.
I've been in this industry now for 15 years, and when I started, we were faxing all of our documents out. I mean, email existed, but not like it does today. Just small things like that have increased productivity.
Right. The basic technology in the construction site has progressed so much in the last decade. We've got our superintendents on the job site with an iPad or a laptop. They're able to conference in an architect or an engineer, get them on the spot immediately to show them a situation or an as-built condition or something they've discovered under the ground that they can respond to immediately. It still may require a field visit, but they can get the information back and forth so quickly that question can be answered and you can move on. The construction process can progress. It's phenomenal how much it's changed in the last several years, and it's been really quick.
I've often had the thought that if the pandemic had happened even a few years prior, how much more we would have been impacted, because a lot of our jobs were able to transition to remote meetings and FaceTiming inspectors to get inspections done. That's something that never used to happen, but now it has, and I think some of that will continue long term, because how much more efficient can an inspector be if they can just log in and skip all that drive time?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And as far as the actual buildings themselves, there's less wire in the buildings, a lot more wireless technology within the buildings. You don't have to get a fire alarm wire to the building or to the room. It can respond over radio waves or through cell towers. All of that stuff just eliminates products that go into a building, so the footprint gets smaller within the building and the footprint to the environment gets smaller because it's traveling through the air, and it's virtually invisible.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we've covered a lot of topics today, and I want to end with one last rapid fire question here. So you get to answer yes or no, depending on your opinion, all right? Here we go. Do you see the pace of change within the construction industry continuing to accelerate so quickly, like it has in the last couple of years, as we move forward? Chris?
I want to say no. It's been really hard to keep up, but we've always done it, so it's got to be a yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes from Todd.
Emphatic
Definitely
yes.
a yes.
Definitely a yes. I think on the safety front and the technology front, the sky's the limit.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We'll revisit this conversation in 5 years and see where we're at. Thank you all for joining me today and sharing your insights.
Well, thanks, Elissa.
Thank you for joining us for the Perlo Podcast. Visit us online at perlo.biz. Subscribe to catch our future episodes and join us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube to discuss all things construction. And finally, work hard, do what's right, and have fun. Until next time.